As Ronald Reagan used to say, rather famously, the man in this world you should mistrust the most, in whose good intentions you should have the least faith, is the man who knocks on your door and says, "I'm from the government, and I'm here to help." It was true when he first said it back in the late 60s, and I would argue today it's true more than it's ever been. But true to the Democratic Party's current belief that it's never a bad time to go full Orwell, Joe Biden wants to send representatives of the federal government to your front door, not to help with anything or to provide any sort of useful assistance, but to lecture you about what a dumb, stupid, ignorant, anti-science rube you are because you declined to go and get a medical treatment that you don't want or need. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Joe Biden is going to mobilize an army of hall monitor vaccine scolders to come right to your very domicile and give you the stern, finger-wagging lecture on vaccine compliance, of which you are in such obvious and dire need. But wait a second, I hear you say, wasn't it just 8 or 9 months ago that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, the artist now known as Vice President Black Mask Grim Reaper Ninja Lady, or, if you prefer, the California Cackler, were calling it the Trump vaccine and flatly asserting that they'd never take it as long as they live under any circumstances? And you would be correct, of course, but we're not allowed to talk about that anymore. Those are inconvenient facts that have been duly swept under the rug and into the dustbin of the media Democrat complex memory hole, and may they never be discussed again by anyone. And there's another, much more important question that I also hear you asking. How did this person on my doorstep find out about my vaccination status? Is there some exhaustive database listing the vaxxed and the unvaxxed? Because I'm pretty goddamn sure I never authorized my name to be put on any such list. And furthermore, I'm pretty sure there are legislative constraints on the types of data that the government is allowed to compile on private citizens. It is, after all, the whole reason that we have a do not call list. So if Joe's little hall monitors are prowling around my neighborhood and they've got a list with my name and my address and my vaccine status on it, then that information was gathered in contravention of the law, because I never authorized any agent of the federal government to compile medical information about me. Data of that sort are supposed to be privileged information between me and my healthcare provider. So what, did they repeal all of the HIPAA laws while I wasn't looking and nobody told me? And again, I know I've asked this before, but where the hell are the patients' rights activists in all of this? When the laws they fought so hard to enact are being rent asunder and practically invalidated altogether. How is it that they've all been as quiet as church mice for the past year and a half almost, when this is when we actually need them? They waged a years-long battle to make sure everyone had to stand 6 feet apart in the pharmacy line, but government agents walking around with people's medical records is totally cool now? According to the ossified corpse who is ostensibly our president, we should be very, very frightened, quivering with trepidation about the fact that only 47.9% of the U.S. population is fully vaccinated against the COVID-19. But true to form, neither he nor anyone in his administration ever makes mention of the 35 million Americans who have had the virus and recovered from it and thus enjoy robust acquired immunity. And I don't even know whether I'm allowed to say that on YouTube. Maybe I'm not. Sometimes if you interpret official government statistics in ways that don't comport with the prevailing big tech approved political narrative, you get your video pulled down for something called medical misinformation. So if I use only official CDC statistics to point out that around 70% of the population enjoys either inoculated immunity or acquired immunity, then I'm walking on thin ice, flirting with the banhammer. But I will not say the dreaded verboten term that rhymes with flurred flamunity, because in YouTube's book, that's basically the same as posting hardcore porn videos. But actually, I take that back, because you totally can post hardcore porn videos on YouTube as long as it's a couple of gay dudes who have a strategically positioned towel so you can't see the actual sodomy that's being performed, because content like that is healthy and normative, and you don't even have to tag it as being for adults only. So gather the kiddies around the living room after dinner tonight so you can all enjoy YouTube Gay Sodomy Hour together as a cohesive family unit. Just don't think about making any suggestion that people who have already had a disease have no need, allegedly, to get themselves inoculated against it. Because gay sodomy is family-friendly content, but honest and frank discussions about the realities of medical science, allegedly, are not. But let's make no mistake here. It's easy to look at the Democrats and see just a bunch of bumbling old fools who can't tell their ass from a hole in the ground and just blunder along from one mistake to the next. And in Joe Biden's case, that's probably not an altogether unfair assessment. But that being said, none of this stuff is any accident. They are playing a long game here, and they're playing it a hell of a lot better than the Republicans do. The sum of the parts here is that the Democrats want very badly for the federal government to be an intimate part of your everyday life and the everyday lives of everyone in the country. The utopia toward which they strive, and which all of their policy initiatives are designed to bring about, is one in which all real political power is wielded by the central government from Washington, in which state and local governments are neutered to the point of total irrelevance. Sending federal employees directly to your door to scold you for being a filthy anti-vaxxer is just a small component of that overarching equation. And if you're thinking, the only time I've ever had someone from the federal government come to my door, it was a census taker. Don't feel bad, because you're not the only one. The census taker is supposed to be the only federal government employee who ever darkens the doorway of your home. And we do the census pretty much all by mail and online now anyway, so technically speaking, there are zero good reasons why someone from the central government needs to come rapping on your door unless you're under suspicion of having committed some federal criminal offense. And that's another definition that seems to be getting looser and looser, doesn't it? But they want you to think of interacting with federal employees as just a part of your normal daily routine. The vaccine hall monitors are part of it. And so is Pelosi's big new idea, where she wants the U.S. Capitol Police to open up field offices all across the country so we can root out the dangerous extremist insurrectionists who jacked her laptop and farted on her desk once and for all. But here's the thing. This was always going to be a follow-on to the Defund the Police campaign and to last year's summer of establishment-approved arson and race riots. First, you make it impossible to be a cop by eviscerating all the police budgets and giving them no political support. So the good cops that you have, they wind up quitting, and you don't have any good young cops in the pipeline, because if you're a promising young man or woman in the year 2021, why in your right mind would you be choosing a career in street-level law enforcement? So crime explodes naturally. The citizenry gets increasingly scared and frustrated. They just want to be able to open up their stores, run their businesses in peace, maybe not be murdered when they walk down the main street of their own hometown. But look, just like magic, who do we have offering us a nice, tidy solution? Why, it's Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi. Well, look here, they say. We couldn't help noticing how much trouble you're having with crime there in your local community. So how about if we open up a branch of the U.S. Capitol Police right there in your town to help you do the job that your local police department and its filthy white supremacist leaders have been failing at so very badly? What do you say, huh? We don't have any ulterior motives here. We're not trying to reduce state and local governments to being just cute little notional concepts, and we never, ever said that defunding the police was a good idea. That's just a filthy right-wing conspiracy theory. You know who wants to defund the police? Trump. He talked about it when he was telling the Russian hookers to pee on the bed, because he's a pretty sick bastard. And speaking of sick bastards, Jim Eagle, hit the music, please. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where I encourage you to watch this video at least 3 times so that maybe one of the views doesn't get deleted. But you wouldn't have watched it 3 times anyway, right? Of course you would have. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant, and I think you know exactly what we need to talk about. Because Donald J. Trump is in a law-suing mood, baby. And he's calling the bastards out by name, and that includes you, Jack Rasputin, the volleyball whisperer. Assuming you've managed to muster the energy to glance up from the ferocious bong rip you just took long enough to take note of the former president of the United States ripping you a new legal asshole. Now, I love that he is suing them personally, and I love that it's a class action First Amendment suit. They really had a wide array of choices, legally speaking, as far as which avenue they chose to pursue, and First Amendment cases are often the most difficult ones to win at the Supreme Court level, which obviously is where this thing is going to be headed ultimately. So I'm reminded of a line from John F. Kennedy, Rice University, 12 September 1962. We choose to do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. In other words, says Donald Trump, you have wronged me severely, you big tech bastards, me and everyone else who joins the class action, that we choose to fight the toughest battle on the hardest field, because we will still beat your ass, because we are right and you are wrong. So stick that in your bong and smoke it, pal. And you know, it's really too bad that we have no functioning fourth estate anymore, that we have to turn to ruggedly handsome citizen journalists for honest, dispassionate analysis of the events of the day, because if we did, then we could hear their thoughts on what may well wind up being the most important decision in American jurisprudence in the entire 21st century. But then, they steadfastly refused to cover possibly the biggest news story since World War II last year, so it ought to cause us no shock at all when they sit this one out as well, which they already seem determined to do, because being a fancy professional journalist in the third decade of the 21st century apparently means surfing Twitter all day long and calling people names who say things you don't like, and calling them worse names if they decide to cover a story that might reflect badly on the regime for which you so dutifully carry such large amounts of water on a daily basis. But it really is weird. I don't think I'll ever grow accustomed to it, living in a world where some of the biggest named journalists, term used loosely, spend less time covering stories and more time slandering other reporters, their own colleagues, for covering stories they don't like, or reporting on a story in a manner of which they don't approve. In fact, sometimes I have trouble lately determining where the dividing line is between professional journalist and middling internet troll, because it would seem those two titles have conflated with one another just about as totally as the titles of pop singer and stripper have. But alas, we do have no fourth estate, none to speak of. The news is an entertainment product being run on an entertainment industry model. The big tech oligarchs are functioning as a de facto ministry of truth, as an organ of government in all but name. But if you want to know the one reason why the standard rejoinder of, hey, it's a private company, they can do whatever they want, is meaningless horse shit at this point, then listen up, because here it comes. The defendants in this class action, Mr. Pichai, Mr. Zuckerberg, and Mr. Volleyball Whisperer, are the heads of companies which have, through anti-competitive business practices, created an effective stranglehold on the transmission of information from one citizen to another. The Constitution established, and the courts have held, that the right of the citizen to speak freely in the public square is sacrosanct and inviolable, and furthermore, that the public square is wherever and whatever the public decides it is. If there is a private entity that controls access to any space that effectively functions as the public square, whether it's an actual physical space or not, then that private entity assumes the duty of safeguarding the people's right to engage in protected speech in that public square. And the heads of these companies effectively made themselves into the public square by acting disingenuously, as it turns out, like they knew and understood all of this and would implement their content policies accordingly. And they parlayed that into a lie that turned into total marketplace dominance. In other words, they used the false promise of impartiality and good intentions to put themselves into a position where they controlled, for all intents and purposes, what information the public sees and doesn't see. And when they deemed themselves sufficiently empowered that they thought they could start, let's say, swinging the results of presidential elections, well, I don't think you need me to tell you how that all went down. And the other thing we need to talk about is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996, because even a lot of professional talkers and analysts seem to betray a rather imperfect understanding of what Section 230 is, why it existed in the first place, and how the defendants in this class action have spent the past 20 plus years turning it into a tool for the maintenance and the expansion of their power and their control. If you remember 1996, you probably remember a world where you didn't have the internet yet. I think that was 2 years before I had the internet. There was no such thing as social media in 1996. Websites didn't have comment sections. Watching and sharing videos on the web was still a thing that was far off years in the future. If you wanted to look at a photo on a website, you could click on the thumbnail, go take a shower, prepare your dinner, and by the time you were done, your 28K phone modem probably had almost finished loading the picture. Now, if you lived in the 90s and you wanted to interact with a group of other people online in something approaching real time, then you had to use something called a newsgroup. Newsgroups were social media before the term social media had ever been devised. But that is the world in which the Communications Decency Act of 1996 was written. A world in which sitting members of Congress were declaring on the House floor, on the record, in complete seriousness, that the internet is a series of tubes. The world in which the broader law, and Section 230 more specifically, was written was a world in which the bill's authors could not even have contemplated something like the social media / internet environment that exists here in the first half of the 2020s. So when the guy or the gal who wrote Section 230, the worst thing a person could do to another person online would be to post a bunch of shockingly illegal pornography on the newsgroup that the other person runs. Because remember, newsgroups at this time were the only efficient means of disseminating pictures and video online. And then so you call up the cops and say, look, this horrible pervert is hosting shockingly illegal pornography on the newsgroup that he moderates. So you go get him, boys. Throw the book at that deviant scumbag. So when Section 230 was established, it gave qualified immunity for online content hosts. That was literally something like that was the only scenario whereby you could try to use the internet to slander somebody else and to wreck their life. But fast forward 25 years and Mr. Pichai, Mr. Zuckerberg, and Mr. Volleyball Whisperer, each with his respective gaggle of fabulously high-priced legal counsel, have managed to finagle this 1990s law meant to basically regulate newsgroup revenge porn into something that empowers them to silence and deplatform the President of the United States himself when they disagree with him politically, to effectively remove U.S. citizens from polite society who have done nothing but to engage in protected speech. And you can't blame them for doing it, because who the hell wouldn't take every advantage the law gives to them? The shame lies with our legislators, who have had no shortage of opportunities to update the Communications Decency Act and to revise Section 230 into something that has some actual utility in the world of today, as opposed to the world of a quarter century ago, when all you knew about the internet was that someone called AOL keeps sending me these free CDs with no music on them. So they're filing this case in Florida, and I'm having a fairly easy time picturing it working its way to the Supreme Court just in time for the 2024 election season, which would be pretty interesting. But whenever it does get there, I'm also filled with a sense of foreboding and dread. Like it's almost a foregone conclusion that it's going to be a 5-4 decision with Chief Justice Swampy McSwampington siding with the liberals so as to avoid any unduly controversial decisions, just like he seemingly always does. And yeah, I'm probably being an Eeyore about it, but I will be thrilled and delighted if it turns out differently, because it is a hugely important matter with very real ramifications for every single American. And with that, I will see you Friday. Have a pleasant tomorrow. Get off my lawn.